One of the other things that's been an important indicator of success is having a licensee in the room when you start a new program.
Heath Hoglund is the president of Via Licensing Alliance, the world's largest patent pool organization. He believes the way to strike better balance in a patent pool is to encourage getting the licensee and the licensor in the room together.
I have little sympathy for the implementers who complain about not having influence on the outcome when they don't participate in the first place.
Welcome to Clause 8, presented by TradeSpace, a revolutionary end-to-end AI-powered IP management platform that helps companies unlock the value of their IP. If you enjoy this show, please subscribe at voiceofip.com for updates. In today's episode, Heath takes us behind the scenes of how patent pools work, why they succeed or fail, and the critical role they play in making licensing more efficient for both innovators and implementers, and why Via sees itself as a bridge in the industry. And now, here's your host, Eli Mazour.
So let's jump into it. For people who aren't in this area, can you just, in your own words, describe what are patent pools and what role do they play?
Sure. Well, the sort of simple way I try to explain patent pools and Via's role in patent pools is that basically we act as kind of a broker between licensors and licensees. And what we do is put together a bunch of licensors who have patents that are relevant to a particular technology, and then create a package that we license to implementer companies who want to use the underlying technology. And our role is really making the package, and then serving as the broker in between the licensors and licensees to collect the royalties and distribute them to the licensors.
And I guess, why is there a need for that?
Yeah, sure. There's some historical stories about this, but the practical thing nowadays is that for many important standards, audio standards, video standards, communication standards, charging standards, lots of different standards, there ends up being just a large number of companies that have relevant patents. And so by that, I mean, there can be 50 or more companies with patents relevant to a particular technology. And if you want to implement that, the right thing to do is to go around and take a license from each of the 50 companies that would have a relevant patent. That's terribly inefficient to do. And so our business model is really to try to make that a more efficient process. And really, the pitch for our business is that we're really a value add both to the licensors and to the licensees. We make it easier for the licensees to go around and collect those licenses, and make it easier for the licensors, because for some of our programs, we have over 1,000 different licensees, and it's a big effort to go and collect all those. So we try to be a value add on both sides for licensors and licensees.
And I imagine, obviously, if you're like the licensors are usually the innovators who are coming up with technology, and if you're a small player, then it makes a lot of sense. But let's say, why does it make sense for a company like Dolby, obviously, who views themselves as doing the bulk of the work for creating some of these standards, obviously has deep experience with licensing and so forth. Why are they interested in joining pools?
For Dolby in particular, I would say they're somewhat unique in that their business model is such that they want to be supportive of an industry ecosystem. So they have relationships with content creators, with product manufacturers, and also, they're a very consumer-facing brand. They have a very well-known brand. So they want to be ecosystem building. And for that reason, they tend to prefer to participate in patent pools, because it is the kind of solution that really does help enable a technology. It makes it a lot easier to go and adopt a technology if you know they can go get, a convenient pool license for it in one place. But your underlying point, which is that there are some large licensors who prefer to go off and do their own licensing. Qualcomm, of course, is one of the very famous American licensing companies, and they tend not to participate in pools for the reasons that you're suggesting, which is that they have the infrastructure and ability to go off and do their own licensing, and so that's what they prefer to do.
And obviously you hear a lot about pools being set up, and sometimes they seem to work out, sometimes they don't. And obviously probably matters a lot whether the technology, how adoption of technology goes. But from your perspective, when do you think patent pools work? When do they make sense versus when they don't work and probably don't make sense?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. And I've certainly spent some time like looking at that and talking about it and thinking about it. But there are a few things that tend to make a pool successful. Obviously, the underlying technology has to be useful and obtain some reasonable market adoption. Otherwise, there's no commercial reason for it. Another thing you need to have is you need to have a critical mass of the licensors. It doesn't necessarily have to be a majority of the licensors, but it does need to be a significant part of them in order for a pool to work. The royalty rate has to be something that both the licensors and licensees are equally unhappy about, and that's definitely a feature of it. And from our perspective, you need either to have a significant licensee who really wants to support a pool solution for some reason or another. And when I say you need that, because what happens if you have a significant licensee who wants to support a pool, what that means is that the pool will start generating revenue. And once a pool starts generating revenue, it will attract more licensors. And so if you have a significant licensee who's willing to just step up and support a pool, that will help drive success. If you don't have that, then on the other side, what you need to have is some licensors who are willing to undertake some meaningful enforcement activity in order to send the message that you really do need to take a license or a pool license for the underlying technology. So those are the big things you need. You also need a really talented pool administrator, which is where we come in.
So I guess, how do you get your licensors to take that on themselves to say, hey, this implementer is not paying royalties through a pool. We're going to enforce our patents independently. Wouldn't they always wait for the other, somebody else in the pool to take on that burden? How do you incentivize that kind of behavior? Yeah.
That's very case specific, I would say. And you're right about that. That definitely happens where there's some licensors who prefer not to be the ones enforcing, but not all licensors are like that. There are some licensors who take a principled approach to licensing, and if somebody isn't acting the way they should, they're just plain willing to enforce. The thing we do in the pools is that we'll often have some kind of incentive or benefit or reward for the licensors who are willing to undertake enforcement. It varies by different pool, but sometimes it'll be, for example, if there's an unwilling or reluctant licensee who, if a particular licensor enforces against a reluctant licensee, it could be that that licensor gets all of the past practice or some significant part of the past practice if that company takes a license to the pool. There are other mechanisms that we have. Sometimes there's a litigating licensor credit. So in some pools, licensor who regularly enforces will get some extra allocation from the royalties. So there's some monetary incentives that we can have inside the pool structure that encourages it. But there's also occasions where licensors just don't even need that additional incentive to undertake enforcement.
Do our legal fees get ever covered by the pool?
Sure, yeah, that's another feature, and that varies. But with enforcement activity, there's a bunch of different there's different ways of doing U.S. litigation. The German litigation has been one of the hot spots for SEP enforcement, and they have a couple things. They have the legal fees and they have the bonds. So sometimes the pool will cover legal fees or the bond, and just varies by program and also varies by where the pool is in terms of its maturity.
Another feature of the pools, obviously, is that, it's almost sometimes, at least when I first heard about it, it's a cross-licensing mechanism, right? Sometimes there's innovators and implementers, but is that less the case these days where, of course, some of these implementers get a few patents here and there, but is that really not the role of the pools these days? Is it more to...
Actually, I don't think it ends up being the primary purpose of a pool, because the cross-licensing thing matters more to some of the really big companies, but they tend to have large portfolios that cover just a wide range of stuff that's beyond the scope of a single patent pool. If you pick some of the biggest companies, they'll end up doing some cross-licensing deals just because they both have so many patents and they want to clear it out. It is, in fact, a practical aspect of a successful patent pool that it will also turn into a cross-license among all of the licensors and licensees participating. But I don't think that's what drives the success of a program, again, because the largest licensors have just portfolios that will far exceed the particular portfolio in a pool.
I don't remember the first time I heard about pools, but I feel like every time I first heard about it, it was like this slide with these like circles representing different pools and companies all over. And it looked extremely complicated. And every time you see a slide, it looks a little different. And somebody tells you, well, they moved from here and there. And then I talk to some of these implementers and they say, well, that's actually our experience. We have no idea what's going on. We can't keep track of it. And that's what makes it so hard for us. Do you get their perspective and any words of reassurances for them about navigating all that?
Well, a couple things to say about that. One is that many of the large implementers will also have patents that are relevant to the underlying technology. And we do encourage those implementers to become licensors in the programs where they are licensees. They don't always do it, and for reasons that I don't fully understand. But to me, that's one of the best ways to really have knowledge and influence about what's going on with a particular patent pool is to be in the room where the licensors meet and talk about the program. So for the implementers who feel like they don't know what's happening, there's a really easy solution, which is show up and participate and you will. So that's the thing. Having said that, I would say, as you might imagine, getting 10 or 20 or 30 significant companies in a room together and trying to negotiate something that is okay for everybody gets complicated. There's no doubt about that. That happens, but I think that's a different thing. The underlying pool terms can get tricky because there are just so many different interests to satisfy. But that's the cost of doing business, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe a more specific issue that I hear about and placing the pools in the ecosystem of a lot of patents covering a certain technology is that when an implementer says, okay, I want to be covered, I want to pay this pool and just pay this rate that's going to cover this technology. And they do that, and then another pool pops up. And then an independent company pops up, and then an independent inventor approaches them. And they're like, well, when I agree to this one rate, I don't know what's, I'm not fully covered. And I don't know if even what I'm agreeing to pay is going to make economic sense by the time I'm done paying all of them. Any kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the few things about it. One is that for the rate itself, at least my experience is that the patent pool rate tends to be a pretty good deal. And what I mean by that is that if you went out and took 50 licenses for a particular technology and added them all up versus went and took a patent pool license for those same 50 companies, I think you generally find that the pool license is a good deal. And so I think that's just a dynamic that happens. For our patent pools, obviously we try to get all of the licensors to join who may have relevant patents, but I can't say never, because I think for some of our programs we have been successful at getting all of the relevant patents into our program, or at least all of them that are ever going to be enforced. And so you can have that successful outcome, but it's also fair to say that for a lot or maybe most programs, you don't get 100% aggregation. And so there are often single patent owners or whatever who choose not to join a pool. And it's fair to say, yeah, you still have to deal with them. But the answer from my perspective is that, okay, look, you can take a pool license that covers, say, 49 or as they say 45 out of the 50 relevant licensors, or just go take 50 licenses. So, it can't happen that you still have to deal with a handful of licensors who won't participate in a pool for whatever reason. But it does a lot of good. And then on the topic of multiple pools, that happens. A similar answer, which is that obviously having one pool is the best outcome. But there's a whole spectrum, which is if you start with 50 licensors, it's better to have 5 pools than no pools. It's better to have 4 than 5. It's better to have 3 than 2 and 2 than 3. But 1 is the one that we would like to see, but it just as a market reality doesn't always work out that way. And it's not, one of the things just to say this is it's not like a new phenomena. If you rewind time and look at the technologies from decades ago, meaning DVD and Blu-ray discs, which were from the 90s or whatever it was, there were a couple pools for those technologies, and it was for the reason that just worked out that the licensors didn't coalesce around a single program and ended up with 2 pools, and implementers needed to take a license to both of the pools, but it was still a better outcome than not having any.
You mentioned you were Dolby before joining the predecessor VLA. But I want to go a little bit back in time because I saw you actually founded an IP firm in Puerto Rico. And actually, I've met some IP attorneys from Puerto Rico a long time ago, but I didn't know there was an IP firm in Puerto Rico. Can you tell us, how did you end up founding a firm there? And then more importantly, how did you end up leaving to Dolby?
It's a personal story. It was love. It was love is what happens. My wife went to graduate school in Puerto Rico. And so I was young at the time. And so we decided to move there. And it was for her to go to graduate school. It was only a couple years out of law school or so. And I figured I'd just find a job down there. And so I sat for the bar and they have sort of an unusual system, but my Spanish is not good enough to sit for the local bar, but I was able to sit for the federal bar. Anyhow, I ended up getting some clients before I got a job. And so that's how I ended up starting a law firm down there. And that was a good experience for me. And then I ended up, by chance, my oldest son is 18 years old. And when he came along, it was one of those sort of life decisions you have to make. Are we going to spend our life in Puerto Rico? My wife's from New York, and I like New York to visit, but not where I want to live. And I'm from Minnesota, which is a hard sell to anybody. And
a bit
so
colder.
A bit colder. And by chance, one of the partners that I used to work for connected me to the job opportunity at Dolby. They were at the time hiring their first chief patent counsel, and that was a good fit for me. And so we moved back from Puerto Rico to San Francisco, and that's how that happened. But I really enjoyed that time. That's a lovely place. If you haven't visited, you sure should. And also, my former partner still practices. He kept my name on the practice, so I still have my name on a law firm in Puerto Rico, although I don't have any participation in it anymore.
You mentioned about like Dolby. Obviously, it's unique, I think, in some ways that it does have such it's a technology company, but it has such a strong brand. And I guess you were part of that, kind of building that. What was the strategy behind that?
So Dolby's unique in the sense that in terms of their brand, I'll say lucky, but it's beyond lucky, is that when Ray founded the company, the underlying technology was something that back in the day when you had cassette tapes, you could, as a consumer, you could hear the difference between you pushed the Dolby button and then turned it off, you could actually hear it. And so that was something that really first started creating such a strong brand recognition for Dolby. But what happened from that is that consumer electronic manufacturers then wanted to have the Dolby brand on their products. So if you go buy a TV or whatever it is at an electronics store, there's tons of products that will carry the Dolby name as a sort of a identification of the quality of the audio or video technology. And from a consumer perspective, you think about this, it is lucky in the sense that the things that are like really positive some of the things that are really positive things in your life, which are like going and watching a movie, you'll see the Dolby brand. Going and buying a new TV, which is like something that you kind of look forward to and it's a cool thing, you're excited about it, you'll see the Dolby brand. Like going and buying a new AV receiver, same thing. So it happens that the brand ends up being associated with some of the things that are really happy events in your life.
I see other technology companies, kind of innovators, they sometimes do a push to raise their brand awareness. Do you think that's important? I guess if you do have technology that is going to be implemented likely by other companies, that obviously that you have like independent brand to tell your story about why your technology is important.
Well, it's super valuable. I mean, it's super valuable. Actually, one of the companies that's like a patent pool, but not actually a patent pool, is the HDMI program, where they do license some patents, but they also license the underlying technology. And that is a program where they have been really successful at attaching the brand. So if you go buy an HDMI cable or whatever, you'll look for that little logo. And that's been a big success for that program. And it's something we certainly have looked at. And if we've found the right opportunity, would like to do something like that. But definitely if you can figure out how to make that work, I think it's really a powerful thing. It does a lot of good also for enforcement, because as I'm sure and probably your listeners do too, it's not always super easy to demonstrate an infringement of an SEP, but it's a lot easier to demonstrate infringement of a simple little trademark logo. It's something that is a real advantage for other reasons as well.
That's interesting. So you mentioned that Via Licensing's logo is a bridge, and when you're at Dolby, you're at one end of a bridge, I guess. Do you remember what was your perspective about, obviously you mentioned it was a positive thing, but just dealing with pools? What was it? Do you have any pain points when you were at Dolby, when you were like, hey, if I had a magic wand, this is what I would want all these pools to do, or
Well,
kind of.
yeah, the one I would say that actually one of the pools that we participated in had a very high threshold for making changes to the programs. In fact, one of the programs we participated in had the requirement that any decision was unanimous. And you can just imagine how difficult that
Yeah.
is. And so that is, to me, sometimes even if you make the wrong decision, as long as you do it quickly and correct, you're better off than not making any decision for a very long time. So that was one of the early challenges that I saw, and one thing I've certainly tried to correct. And there is this sort of tension between licensors who tend to want to have a very high voting threshold so they feel like they have influence on the outcome. From our perspective, we want to have it so we can move quickly. And to me, it's okay if you make a wrong decision every once in a while. If you can also correct it, it's, to me, a better outcome.
And now that you are the bridge, anything that has surprised you that maybe you didn't fully appreciate when you were the
As
innovator?
only a licensor? Well, we'll say this is that, so one of the first things that I worked on was merging Via and MPEG LA into one organization. And it worked for a lot of reasons, and I think has been a very good thing for us. And one of the things that made it work was that the two organizations had a similar sort of philosophy and culture. I mean, both of them try to be balanced and not too licensor. I think Via maybe was a little bit more licensor friendly, and Via MPEG LA was maybe a little bit more licensee friendly, but they were close together in terms of how that was. So it's been that kind of worked. But the thing that surprised me is just how long it takes to integrate two totally separate independent organizations into one organization and get everything flowing in the right ways. And in fact, we're still dealing with the IT systems and getting that ironed out. It's just stuff like that. It takes way longer than you ever think it will.
And, obviously VLA and MPEG LA were historically two of the most significant pool administrators. Brief history there that I guess, and maybe you could fill it in some of it, but in 1995, I guess the DOJ and FTC basically said patent pools are a good thing. And then there's a letter issued by DOJ. MPEG LA was formed in 1997 for the MPEG-2 format, which was digital television signals. And then Via Licensing was in 2006, I believe, with the RFID. And I guess I'm talking about that in that these are like the two giants coming together. And you hinted at some of that, but I guess, can you tell us more about why you thought that made sense, that merger?
Yeah, sure. A few things. One is that Via had historically really extraordinary success in running audio programs. MPEG LA had historical success in running video programs, as well as some other things, as well as some communications and other things. When I started at Via, we looked around at what are the opportunities that we have. And actually, one of the things, as a pool administrator, you wouldn't believe how long it takes to start a new program. It takes so long to get the licensors into a room together, to then get them talking about what are the terms, to get them all to agree on here's the structure and all that kind of stuff. It takes a very, very long time to start a new pool. And so when I started, MPEG LA was unique in that they had done the groundwork to have a number of new pools launched, but ones that had not yet obtained commercial success. And so it's sort of unique in that we saw it as an opportunity to jump ahead in the game of having some pools that we could really try to drive forward. And that's, in fact, what we were focusing on are some of the pools that technologies that MPEG LA had programs for, but had not yet gained market success.
And I saw VLA has described itself as the world's largest patent pool organization. Do you think that's important for any particular reason, or is it more of a...
Oh, yeah, no, I think it is important. We do try very hard to build a community of licensors and licensees because getting people to at least listen to each other once in a while helps a lot in finding common ground. And one of the unique advantages that we have is that we have over 1,000 licensees for some of our programs. Among the various programs we have, I think we're closer to 100 than 50 in terms of the number of licensors that we have participating in our programs. And so when we want to start a new program or talk about something, it makes it easier for us because we have a relationship with the important licensees and we have a long relationship with the important licensors. A couple things that we do, and this is maybe a little bit just barely promotional, but it's responsive. We have one of the typical things for pools is they'll have pool meetings, and we do ours now twice a year. We have one in September and one in March. But at that time, we get all of the licensors together to talk about the programs. And it's really convenient because we organize all the licensors to come to one place at the same time, and they can come and join and participate in the various different pool discussions for the different programs all at once, rather than doing a one-off here and there. So that's been one of the things that's made it easier, and it makes it easier for us to start new programs because we have everybody in the same place to talk about something if we want to.
And I think your logo, like you said, makes it clear how you want VLA to be viewed as really a bridge between licensors and licensees. But I want to go a little bit back to this. But it seems like the licensors accept this, the innovators, they accept it. But maybe some of the implementers are more skeptical of that, and they see that now it's just a bunch of licensors getting together and trying to make us give them money. I guess
that's one of the really unique things about the patent pools is that the companies who implement the technology are 100% welcome to come and participate in the discussion around forming the pool as a licensor. So whoever it is, they have patents. We want, in fact, to jump back to one of the questions you asked earlier, one of the other things that's been an important indicator of success is having a licensee in the room when you start a new program. And that's important because it does help strike a better balance, and we want that. And so, to say it this way, I have little sympathy for the implementers who complain about not having influence on the outcome when they don't participate in the first place.
So that's interesting. So now I guess when you set up a program, you give members of existing pools the opportunity to participate in those discussions about the structure.
Oh, but where it's open, and beyond that, we're open to having broader participation. I mean, the typical way, in different pools can start in different ways, but the general way for us is to just have an open meeting, and both licensors and licensees who have patents. And that's the guidance from the DOJ guidance, was that you can include anybody that has relevant IP. That's your ticket to entry in the room, is to have a relevant patent. But implementers who do are more than welcome, and we want them in the room when we form a new program.
And you mentioned, I think, other people who do most things that you do mention the same thing. Both sides have to be equally unhappy about the rate. But how do you figure out what that is? Can you give us a little more detail? How does that happen in a practical sense?
Yeah, there's so many things that go into that. Of course, we engage some experts who give opinions about what's reasonable and that kind of stuff. We also do some modeling. And one of the things I would say, when you model what the revenue is going to be for a new program, one of the variables, of course, is what is the royalty rate. And you can think of that like, the higher royalty rate, the more money we're going to make. But it doesn't actually work that way, because what happens is that the higher royalty rate you set, the longer it takes you to drive licensee adoption. And so you have to model not just what happens with the higher royalty rate, but you have to model how that royalty rate affects adoption over time. And then there's, like I said, a bunch of things of getting the comps from similar technologies and how that looks in terms of the royalty rate that we set, getting licensors and licensees into a room together and trying to get them to talk and finding a place that's okay for everybody. So there's a lot of things that go into that. There's just a million inputs into how that turns out.
But I guess from perspective of like companies that make the products, is it the kind of thing where they say, hey, my profit margin is only, I make barely 2 cents on on this cassette player or whatever it is?
How do you work with that? Yeah, no, absolutely. We have tended more to think about the underlying value of the technology. It's true that in some products there's just barely any product margin, but at least from my perspective, I can't really control that, and I don't really have the ability to figure out what is somebody's profit margin going to be. Obviously, you have to use realistic numbers, yeah. but we have tended to think more about what's the underlying value of the technology in figuring out what is an appropriate royalty rate.
And I guess one thing that another complaint I hear is that there's no transparency. But one thing I find surprising, actually, if you go on the VLA websites, you guys have all the rates there. And can you talk about that piece? I guess why do you think that's important? Obviously, it's
As far as transparency, we try to be as transparent as we possibly can. We do publish our rates for our programs, and let me say this too: is that one of the unique things about MPEG-LA historically is that they had in all of their licenses, and they advertised this on their webpage, MFN clause for royalty rates in their license agreements. And what that means is that if you took their license, they weren't going to offer somebody a better rate afterwards. Or if they did, they'd come back and offer it to you. So to me, like, that was beyond transparent. It's like it was transparent plus, because they're telling you what it is. So I think that's something that is attractive to implementers, because even if you think the royalty rate is too high as an implementer, if everybody's paying the same royalty rate, there's no disadvantage to you. So to me, that's a very healthy aspect of being transparent.
And I guess that's something you do for all your programs now, is that kind of approach in terms of...
To be direct about it, for the historical VIA programs, we haven't done that, but we have been very transparent about what the rates are, and we've had success because of that as well.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that I hear from economists, you have opposite problem, right? The companies that are holding out in terms of licensing, they create all this friction, expenses, and then they end up getting the same rates based on the licensors who were...
It's not let me just say it this way, is that, when I mentioned that MFN clause, it doesn't work the other way around, because somebody who causes a lot of trouble and for a long time, I mean, you could give them a higher rate than you gave somebody who came earlier.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's that. If you were able to do that, it would be a good thing.
Yeah, our preference is that everybody pays the same rate and it's flat across the industry. That's what we want.
Yeah, and just talking to some of these companies that do license from pools like VLA, it gives them a lot of angst that they might be paying slightly higher than somebody else. And just like they're very worked up about it. So what is the room for and they're like, they must be doing something that we might not know about. They must have an in there in terms of negotiating.
When you talk to those people, tell them they can solve that problem easily by just participating as a licensor in the pools, because then they'll know what's going on. and then the other thing is that, to the extent there's some concern about transparency, that concern is way, way worse if you go off and do bilateral licenses than if you do pool licenses. Because if we wanted to give somebody a special deal, it's a huge lift, because we have to go get our licensors to approve that kind of thing. That's just not easy to do. And so whereas in a bilateral licensing, environment, there's way broader freedom to do bespoke deals.
Let's say there's a company, they want to enter a market that's covered by one of the technologies that you have a pool in, and they think they want to get a license with Via LA. Any advice for them about dealing with you and getting to a positive outcome?
We're easy to deal with. You should ask. I mean, I think I hope that's the market perception. We have a good licensing team, and I mean, we have long relationships across the industry, and we're looking to keep it that way. I would say we're unique in that respect, that we have, especially with a combination of Via and MPEG LA, we have the longest relationships with licensors around the world. One of the things I'll say is that one of the fascinating things that's happened over the last decade or so is the increasing importance of the Chinese licensors, and they really started to participate more. And as more Chinese companies have become licensors, it's had a positive impact, of course, on Chinese companies becoming also licensees of our pools. And that's an area where we're making significant investment. And the reason we're making a significant investment in developing relationship with Chinese companies is because we see that as a long-term opportunity. But I say that in answer to your question because we want to have long-term relationships with our licensors and licensees. And so we're not trying to pull a fast one on anybody. So the advice that I have is come and talk to us because we're open.
These different pools, there's a lot of variation in how the rates are structured in terms of fixed fees and percentages and so forth. You mentioned, I thought it was very interesting, but the HDMI, I guess you get a lot of things together. Have you thought about like the future of licensing, pooling pools or something like that, where, I don't know, you're developing a computer, it's going to have, I don't know, Wi-Fi and MPEG, anything like that you thought about to make things even easier for companies that want to...
Yeah, in terms of the prospects for pools, I'm obviously you take this with a grain of salt, but from my perspective, the pool business has got a lot of opportunity. The world continues to get more complicated in terms of technology, and there continues to be and will, as far as I can see, be a need to have interoperability between devices from different companies and things like that. And with those conditions, that you will continue to have more complicated technology and will continue to need to have devices that interact with each other. There's going to be more and more of a need for figuring out how to solve the underlying IP issues. And if there's a better solution, I don't see it. And if there is, we'd love to hear about it. That's kind of where we are.
As I was preparing for this interview, I was talking to a lot of people who I know take interest in this. And I heard some people are saying there's too much fragmentation. Sometimes there's too much consolidation of pools. Any thoughts about where it's going and if there's an advantage in the consolidation? Do you think there's any advantages in having separate pools where they have to compete with each other?
Yeah, our desired outcome for any pool that we operate is to have a one-stop solution. And I think that almost everybody will say that's the most desirable outcome. So that's something we absolutely agree with that. We'd like to see that happen. The market reality is it's not always going to get there. We try our best to do that. And if not that, to get as close as we possibly can one way or another. The fragmentation, I'll just harp on this some more, but we'd love to have the implementers participate in designing and forming new programs because we're entirely open to it. I think it makes it more likely that a program will succeed, and we want to have a balanced solution at the end of the day.
And you mentioned that you're still figuring out IT issues from your previous merger, but are you interested in growing by merging with other administrators? There's some big names out there and smaller names. Have you thought about that?
The one I can say right now, we're focused on some programs where we see good opportunity for growth, and so I can say that's our current focus. Certainly, there's some other patent pools in the marketplace. I don't see any of them as an immediate opportunity. I'll just say that.
You'll talk about the future of patent pools, and one thing that I guess from a licensee standpoint that I hear is that, and we talked a bit about, is that some of these licensees, as they become more sophisticated, they might start saying, hey, I don't need a patent pool. I want to do, I guess, what you call the Qualcomm model on their own. And then as the licensors have more experience negotiating, maybe with these licensees, they'll say, well, I'll just handle that. And I don't have to worry about these smaller players. They don't have the resources I do. Any thought about pools becoming less desirable for innovators or implementers, or one or the other?
Yeah, the challenge I see for the large implementers, no question about it, they have the ability, and they do a lot of bilateral licensing, so they certainly do have the ability to do that. The problem I see is that one of the things that, and I give a lot of credit to them, there's some other structures out in the market. So you have the lot network, which is the license on transfer thing, and that solves a particular problem. You have AST, which does the sort of group buying of assets or group licensing of assets. So there's different things, but then you have RPX, which is also trying to take away risk. And so the fact that those things exist tell me that there's a concern about clearing risk. And to be direct about this specific risk is that there's some kind of enforcement that results in a adverse judgment that is a very significant royalty or damage award. That's the risk that people are trying to address through RPX, through AST, through LOT. That's a real market issue. And to me, a pool is one of the positive ways of addressing that underlying market issue because it creates a positive place for a small implementer or a small patent owner to be able to go and monetize in an easy way rather than going and trying to find some kind of litigation financing or whatever else it is to go and monetize their assets. So to me, it's a long-term positive way of mitigating that risk. And it's not perfect, but it tends to attract. And I'll just say that for one of the long-time successful programs that we have is the AVC program. So that's a video codec, and we have over 30 licensors for that program. We have a lot of variety in terms of who the licensors are, and some very big companies, some single patent owner kind of companies. But that kind of program where there's a steady revenue stream is attractive to a small licensor, and they'll join and collect their royalties. But for that program, the alternative for an individual patent owner or small patent owner is to go and find some way to monetize, often through enforcement activity. So to me, it's a positive way of addressing the underlying risk.
As I was getting ready to talk to you, I was reading about the letters from the 90s from the DOJ. I was like, that might have been the last time a positive view of patents came out of the government in the last 20 years. And this has been obviously a big theme of my podcast, people talking about things having not gone far enough or far enough and the impact that it has had. But has that had an impact on patent pools? These pools that cover Wi-Fi and MPEG and all that, they seem to be chugging along. But have you seen an impact and innovation from any of these?
Yeah, sure. I do think in terms of technology adoption, I'll tell just a little story. But in one of the other pools that we run is around an audio codec, originally AAC, but it's been improved and supplemented and enhanced and changed and expanded over the years. But there was a significant improvement to the technology that came around in the mid-teens, so 2015 or around that time, anyhow. And that technology improvement wasn't really adopted in the marketplace. And we had set up a separate pool to license that. And at some point, I was at Dolby at the time, we ended up adding that technology to our existing AAC program. And when we did that, the technology became widely adopted within a couple of years. And so to me, it was very clear that having a efficient, reasonable licensing mechanism for that technology made the market adoption so much easier. So I think it can have an effect on market adoption to see that. I would say, and you probably followed this, but there has been an effort by some of the large implementers around video codecs, in particular around the VP9 and then the AV1 work. And Sysvel runs now a program on those technologies, runs some patent pools for those. And I think that has had a impact on those technology adoptions because they're billed as being royalty-free when they're not really royalty-free. And so I think that the market perception and the economics eventually do have an impact on the technology.
What about the state of the patent system in general and any advice for this administration, I guess, what they should focus on?
One of the things I think is really valuable is the work around harmonizing the global IP systems. And I see that as particularly valuable because there's a huge cost that goes into filing patents in the US and Europe and China and Japan and Korea and all these different places. And really they're testing for the same thing, which is whether there's a meaningful invention there. And there's the PCT system and has been helpful in improving this. I think there's a lot of room for further improvement. But to me, finding a way to do a better upfront job of evaluating the merit in a patent application and by that issuing strong patents in a timely manner, I think is one of the most helpful things that you could do. And I think that finding some way to pool resources, because in a certain way it's kind of illogical to have all these different patent offices in the world really trying to do the same thing and spending whatever they spend on it. If you're able to pool that and do a better job and have more predictable rights, I think that's one of the best things that could happen for the industry.
Interesting. And I guess there is the patent prosecution highway program, but it's interesting. Across jurisdictions, it varies how much the allowance in one country impacts the other, and especially the bigger jurisdictions sometimes it seem to completely ignore the results. And
I think that has helped quality because it has created a mechanism for one patent office to look at the work of another patent office, and having access to see what another patent office has done is helpful, but it's not as good as really concentrating a more fulsome effort into doing a good job of evaluation.
Some final questions. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be saying, wow, he has got it figured out. He got clients before he's even started a law firm. He was head of IP at a company like Dolby, and now he's the bridge between you're the center of all this innovation that's going on today and bring it to reality. Any advice for anybody who wants to kind of follow in your footsteps?
Oh, I think I started to blush a little bit there. Thanks for that. But I enjoyed my career in IP so far, and the only thing I guess from my experience, don't be afraid to try something new.
Great advice. And last question, any final thoughts about what you want people in the IP community to think about patent pools and the role of VLA in general, beyond, I guess, what you mentioned?
Well, okay, yeah, we're also a lot of fun. One of the other good things about our
patent pools or VLA?
Oh, both. We have all kinds of fun. Just an anecdote, but one of the things for our pool meetings that we host in San Francisco, we do them at the Fairmont. We've been doing them at the Fairmont Hotel, but I don't know if you know
stayed at the Fairmont Hotel in Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay. So the one here in San Francisco has a very famous bar called the Tonga Room. And, it's one of the classic tiki bars that was started after World War II when that was the fad. And it's been here for that long. It's been here more than 50 years. But anyhow, it has an actual pool inside the bar. And so we, one part of our annual pool meeting in San Francisco, we host a pool party at the tiki bar at the Fairmont. So we do have fun too. Let me just say that.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you let the licensors put the licensees push them in the pool together.
We have everyone. Yeah, we haven't had anybody push somebody else in yet. Yeah.
Definitely other benefits to being members of a VLA pools beyond just licensing technology. But
thank you very much.
Thank you. It was lots of fun talking to you, and thank you for coming out on Clause 8.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget that new episodes of Clause 8 come out every 2 weeks, so be sure not to miss it by subscribing at voiceofip.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts.